Well, good evening to everyone. It's so good to see you here. We were talking about the weather a while ago, and I'm glad it's holding off for us. A little muggy, but hey, we'll handle that. It's just great to see this crowd here this evening. I know many of you all received one of our lecture cards, which we're really excited. This is one of those first kind of signs that we've got things happening like they used to happen. So we'll take it one at a time. What's really nice with now we have registration. You can go to our website and register through Eventbrite for any of our programs, and that also lets us know that you're interested. That way we have your email and we can communicate if there are any changes or whatever. So it's been really helpful to us. We were kind of trepidatious about it to begin with, how to work it and how it would work for us, but we feel really good about it. So the next program we have is the Trail to Sequoia's Syllabary, from the handwritten words to the Acorn Press, and that's going to be on Wednesday, August 18th. We'll be back to our brown bag at noon. Will be the time for that, and that's with Charlie Rodarmer, who's the director of the Sequoia Birthplace Museum. So we're back down kind of in that southeast Tennessee neighborhood, and so we're really excited about that, going from one end of the timeline back, looking at some of that early history. This is the 200th anniversary of the Cherokee Syllabary's creation. So we really look forward to having Charlie with us on Wednesday, August 18th. We welcome our Zoom attendees as well. We're calling this kind of, they say, hybrid sort of programming. So we will have things offered in live streaming for folks all around the region. So if you have people from out of state that you think would be interested, let them know that they can go online, register, and they can then get that Zoom link for our programs. So we're really trying to be accessible to everyone and have the flexibility that this allows. We're also going Facebook Live, so we got a lot of moving parts, but I want to thank Angie Vickers for her help. So my name's Lisa Oakley. I'm Curator of Education here at the Historical Society. Angie is our Marketing and Digital Content Manager. I'm standing in for Dr. Warren Doctor, who is out this week. He will be back next week, and he really hates that he's missing being here for this event. But he wants to send his regards to everyone, and also want to thank CTV for being here and filming. They will be filming all the Society's core brown bags and lectures, and in the next short time you will get a notice, or you can just go to our YouTube channel and you can watch the program again or share it with others. So, you know, the nice thing about technology is it does allow us to do things in new ways and be available and have our programs available, and that's something that people have asked for a very long time. The best way to find out what we have coming and what's going on, and people ask, well, how best can I support you in whatever we might be doing? We're gearing back up for our school programs as well. Knox County and surrounding counties are doing field trips again, which we're very excited about, and Layla Smallwood is out there in Zoom land. She's our programs manager for K-12 education, and she's helping with that virtually, but she's going to have students back in the building starting just in the next month. So we're very, very excited about that as well. But the best way to support what we do and find out what we do is to join. And so we're going to provide a link for those of you all that have that access to our membership page on the website, as well as our upcoming events on the website. If you are not a member yet and don't have one of these beautiful cards that we put together, we would love for you to join so that you can be on that mailing list. We will have another card coming out soon with special events for the rest of the year. So we had so much going on, we needed two different pieces of material. So, as well as our newsline will be coming out this fall. So lots to share with you all, and we really welcome you sharing back with us. So, and one way to do that is by being here with us. So thank you so much again for being here this evening. We will have a question answer time towards the end. So anybody that would like to relay a question through the Zoom chat box, you're welcome to do that, and we'll relay that to our speaker tonight. And those of you all in the audience, please, think about your questions, and we'll have a time to answer those towards the end. Again, I just want to reiterate, welcome. We are beginning to use Eventbrite. That's really handy for communication. But if you have any question at all or just want to contact us, please feel free to call or email that's still the best way to go directly to us. So we're happy to answer any questions we can. So that's our upcoming programming. We have a lot coming in September that we're going to be offering, and then going into the fall season with our Monsters at the Museum and holiday programming. So welcome, welcome, welcome. But you all are not here to hear me keep belaboring that point. I want to introduce our speaker for the evening. Tyler Boyd is a great-grandnephew of Harry T. Burn and great-grandson of Febb Burn. Born and raised in Athens, Tennessee, he earned his BA in History and MS in Education from the University of Tennessee. He has worked as a teacher in Lenore City and Cleveland. He is a Programs Committee member at the McMinn County Living Heritage Museum and a member of the McMinn County, East Tennessee, and Tennessee Historical Societies. I should say probably a very proud member and participant in those. I see him often at the McMinn County events, and know of his support there. His first book, Tennessee Statesman, Harry T. Burn, Women's Suffrage, Free Elections, and a Life of Service, won the East Tennessee Historical Society's Award of Distinction, the DAR's Historic Preservation Award, and was selected for the Tennessee State Museum's 2020 Book Club. He is currently working on 2 new books, so we'll hopefully hear from him soon about those. One about a trailblazing journalist from Chattanooga, and another about a brutal political machine in Polk County. Boy, he leaves us hanging on both of those. But we're going to hear more about his first book and one that's very personal to him and his family. And join me in welcoming Tyler Boyd.
Well, I really appreciate the East Tennessee Historical Society for inviting me here this evening. And I again thank them for the award I've received. Well, this is, to quote Wanda Sobieski of the Suffrage Coalition, this is the year of a centennial plus one. We're still going through this pandemic. I do believe the worst is behind us, but we're still celebrating as best as we can. I appreciate you coming out here. It was still a challenging time. And I also appreciate those of you watching online through Zoom or Facebook. Thanks for tuning in. And I'll go ahead and start by telling why I decided to write this book. And don't worry, there won't be a lot of words, a lot of reading tonight, only on a few of the slides. Mostly going to be photographs, right? So, okay. All right, so I wanted to tell about Harry T. Burn's life in one single source for the historical record for posterity. That was my first goal. My second goal was to celebrate the centennial of this amendment as best as I could, because 100 years only comes once. And I had a lot of inspiration over the years. The things kind of led up to it. Like when I found out about the statue out there, it was back in 2016, and Harry T. Burn Jr. had just passed away, and I thought about, that the door to that generation slammed shut forever, and I had thought that not much was written about Harry T. Burn before this book came along. Very little was written, and most of it was inaccurate. But the one accurate thing was actually written by a gentleman in this room, Dr. William Hardy, former employee here. He wrote a very good write-up that people still use teaching high school about Harry T. Burn and his suffrage vote, which is, you could tell he researched here because everything was factual. But I wanted to get his whole life in one place, and I was glad I was able to do that. And here are the other reasons why I wrote this book. To debunk the apocryphal stories. Burn was opposed to women's suffrage and voted no on the amendment twice. Number 2. His mother admonished him in a threatening letter, saying, don't bother coming home if you don't vote for this, I'll disown you, things like that. And the third one, fearing for his life, he was chased out of the state capitol by an angry mob down the street after casting the deciding vote. So that one has elements of truth, but most of it is completely fabricated. I'll break it down as best as I can. So, okay, now we have here on the top Harry T. Burn's grandfather, Harrison Blair Burn, was born and raised in this cabin in 1836. They were first-generation McMinn Countyans, and Harry's great-grandparents were from Sevier County. Around the same time, his grandfather's sort of growing up, his childhood in McMinn County is when the Seneca Falls Convention in New York took place in 1848, the first ever organization that got together and demanded the right to vote for women, including Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who went on to befriend Susan B. Anthony. Now, Susan B. Anthony, in 1872, 1 year before Harry's mother, Febb Ensminger, was born, she voted illegally in Rochester, her hometown in New York, and she was actually taken to trial, and she was convicted, but they didn't try to actually punish her, make her pay anything or lock her up because they knew it would make her a martyr. So around the same time that Miss Anthony's going through that's when Harry's mother is born, in 1873. Now we have Harry's parents right here. Harry's father, James Lafayette Burn, Jim, came from a staunchly Union Republican family. And Harry's mother, Febb Ensminger, German, came from a family, to quote Harry T. Burn Jr., of unreconstructed Democrat Confederates. And they got married in 1894, and thankfully they put that behind them. And Febb told the kids, as they were being raised, do not discuss the Civil War in this house. We're going to move into the 20th century and raise our children, and thankfully they went on to do pretty good things. Okay, now, there were 4 children. The little fellow on the right there is my great-grandfather, Jack Burn, a couple of years younger than Harry. They were born in 1895 and 1897. And there were also 2 sisters, who I'll get to in just a moment. I don't know why Febb put those bows on there, but I guess maybe that was the style back then. Well, this is literally downtown Iota right here. This one block. The town's never had more than 900 people. Pretty much equidistant between Knoxville and Chattanooga, and this is where Harry grew up. Formerly named Mouse Creek, and then it got changed because Jefferson City used to be Mossy Creek, and they would get the Mouse Creek and Mossy Creek mail messed up. So Iota changed to Iota, and then about 5 years later, Mossy Creek becomes Jefferson City. So what can you do? All right. Then in 1902 was when this photograph was taken. Harry's father worked for the railroad, the Southern Railway, which is now, of course, the Norfolk Southern. And his father is actually pictured right here in the doorway, I believe. And this is the oldest standing depot in all of Tennessee. It was built in 1854. So this is across the street from the downtown block you just saw. So this is literally the epicenter of his small hometown. Now, Lizzie Crozier French, and they're about to have a grave marking for her at the Old Gray Cemetery on August 21st. She was probably the most well-known suffragist out of Knoxville. And she was around this time, she was late middle age, so younger than Susan B. Anthony and Lizzie Cady Stanton, but older than Alice Paul of that generation. And around the same time Harry's sister was born. This is Harry's sister Sarah. They called her Little Sarah because she passed away at age 11. Around the same time Sarah passed away, Lizzie Crozier French came down to McMinn County in Athens and spoke to one of the first women's groups in all of the southern United States about suffrage, getting the idea out there, getting it more mainstream. And then when Harry's working for the railroad during World War I, the suffragists were protesting the National Women's Party suffragists led by Alice Paul, who were different than Carrie Chapman Catt and the National American Women's Suffrage Association. You had 2 groups, one more let's lobby, other top is, let's protest. They were protesting in front of Woodrow Wilson's White House. Mr. President, how long must women wait for liberty? Of course, he's waging a war overseas to make the world safe for democracy, but there's no democracy at home. So at the same time they're doing that, Harry's working for the Southern Railroad. Now here's the family. This home has since been demolished. It's now where the First Baptist Church in Iota is, at the corner of Big Surprise, Burn Road and Main Street in Iota. And you can see Harry's father is second from the left. He's kind of balding there. And there's a little girl standing right in front of him. That is actually my Aunt Otha, and this gentleman right here actually knew her really well when he was growing up. Yeah, so she was actually this gentleman's godmother. So her name's spelled O-T-H-O, but it's pronounced Otha. So she was the youngest of the kids. Okay, so after little Sarah passed away, they moved into this home, and after that, Harry's dad passed away. So it's just a family of 4. And Febb named this home Hathburn, H-A for Harry, T-H for Thomas, and then Burn. It doesn't look like this anymore. I'll show you a picture of it near the end of the presentation, how it looks now. But it's antebellum, built 1849, partly with slave labor. And Harry's father passed in 1916, and they moved in around that time. So this is where Febb was living, and Harry too, whenever the suffrage vote took place in 1920. Okay, thanks to my late great-uncle, James Lane Edwin Burn, former McMinn County historian, and I believe a charter member of the McMinn County Historical Society, and one of my book's dedicatees, he saved this clipping from when Harry first ran for office when he won the Republican nomination in August of 1918. And then this is from his general election. And this actually on the right, that poster is actually here at the McClung collection. I'm not sure if it's on display anywhere because it's not in the best shape. It's kind of deteriorated, but you can see that photograph's actually on the front of my book. So Harry's going to help me tell this story, thankfully, from beyond the grave. And also, thankfully, because my late great-uncle, James Lane Edwin Burn, recorded him in 1968 about his experiences in the suffrage vote and in the legislature. So Harry's going to tell us about his first term in the legislature in 1919.
In the 1918 election, I was approaching 23.
And you were elected.
Elected when
The
I was
woman
still
suffrage vote was in
19 and 20, near the end of that term. So I was, 1995 and 1920. I was almost 24 years old. I was the youngest member of the House, of the House in 1919 and 1921. They call it, Governor Roberts gave me a nickname, Baby Burn.
Baby Burn.
That's pretty well.
Baby Burn. So I think someone was actually elected in 1920 who was younger than him. So in the 1921 session, he was no longer the baby. So I'm sure he liked that. So, okay, now, a lot of you probably know, in case you don't, the history of the 19th Amendment. The 19th Amendment was introduced in Congress in the 1870s, and it kept getting voted down. But it finally was proposed by both chambers of Congress in 1919 and actually passed both chambers. And then they had to have 36 of the then 48 states. So you can see which parts of the country were more friendly to this idea. If you see the dots, it's partial suffrage. Maybe they can vote for president, maybe they can vote at a primary. If you see the white, that means they have full suffrage, like in the Mountain West. The first state to do so was Wyoming as a territory. And as you can see, the southern states, except for Texas, and the mid-Atlantic states were not friendly to suffrage women at all. But by August 1920, just about every single southern state had rejected this amendment. Actually, Tennessee and North Carolina were the only two that hadn't acted yet. So it was, time was running out. And it all came down to the volunteer state. The special session begins to ratify the 19th Amendment in August 1920 because at the time the state legislature in Tennessee met every other year in odd-numbered years. They usually adjourn by April or May. So they're called back into session in August 1920. So Harry leaves his railroad job to go to the special session to vote on this amendment, and he leaves planning to vote yes. He actually said he believed in suffrage. When he got over there, the telegrams, or I guess the angry emails and tweets of the early 20th century started pouring in. So I'll show you two here. 90% of your friends and the people of McMinn County are expecting you to vote against ratification and not violate your oath of office. A vote for it will defeat you in spite of hell. Signed B.J. Hornsby. Okay, a very prominent Republican in McMinn County sends him this. Then a prominent Democrat sends him a letter. So he's got letters from both parties in his county telling him you can't vote for this thing. The women and men of McMinn County are almost unanimous against suffrage amendment. Will you not represent them and not Wilson and Roberts, Governor Roberts, and Northern women and lobbyists voting against amendment? Signed DM, I think his name was Marion Owen. So the truth is McMinn County was split on suffrage. I'd say maybe an edge were against it, maybe 5 percentage points were against it. So that leaves you some room if you're a politician trying to figure out what you need to do. But he was convinced, thanks to these lying telegrams, that people were overwhelmingly against it in McMinn County when they weren't. So we're going to look at an interview with Harry from 1962 on Walter Cronkite's program, The 20th Century, on CBS national television, where he discusses McMinn County's reaction to the suffrage amendment being proposed.
It so happens that after I had gotten to Nashville, people from all over the country had gone into my county. They'd had indignation meetings. They'd caused the courts to adjourn so that they might pass resolutions. And my constituency was in a great state of turmoil. I don't know yet exactly what the majority favored, but anyway, there's lots of feeling existed. So much so that when I would go home on a weekend, I would generally keep a bodyguard around so that no one would attack me.
Okay, remember the bodyguard comment, because all the historians in the room can appreciate the frustration you get when somebody contradicts themselves. So remember that, the bodyguard thing, right? We move on to, okay, this is Anita Pulitzer, kind of like, I guess like Pulitzer Prize at Pulitzer. She worked for Alice Paul, the National Woman's Party. She had gone to McMinn County in July of 1920 and spoken to the Republican chairman there who wrote Harry the letter, the telegram. And he's like, oh, don't worry, Harry will vote for this. You don't have to talk to him. It's okay, because he wasn't there. Well, when Harry gets to the special session, you know, he's starting to caucus with the anti-suffragists. Doesn't look good. And so she talks to him before the vote, a few days before the vote. And she's like, well, what's going on? I thought you were with us. And he says, I cannot pledge myself, but I'll do nothing to hurt you. Well, that's just, you know, typical politician riding the fence, don't want to make anybody offended, you know, just try to ride out the storm, and that's not going to work. So they put him down on their tally list as a doubtful yes vote because of that. And he's actually starting to wear a red rose around this time too. And one reason doesn't necessarily mean that's what he believes in, this is what he intends to do. And one main reason is because of this guy right here. Herschel Mahoney Candler, North Carolina native, not from McMinn County, I have to say, although he did spend his adult life there. Candler was a very powerful Republican. He was a state senator from McMinn County's district. He was the vice president of the Tennessee Bar, a colonel in the National Guard, just Mr. Athens pretty much. And he gave a very bitter speech against suffrage. He's one of the few senators to vote against it, just 4 votes against. And his speech, I'm glad he made the speech because it inspired Harry's mother to write her letter, but among the less offensive things he said were, I'm here representing the high neck, low skirt variety, not the low neck, high skirt variety. He talked about petticoat government, interracial marriage, things like that, if all that kind of stuff's going to happen if women can vote. So it would get him rightfully run out of town today, but back then it didn't really turn many heads. But it turned the head of one woman right here, Harry's mother, Febb Burn. So when Harry's father passed away in 1916, she was only in her 40s. And the county court, since there was no will, the county court awarded the oldest boys, Harry and Jack, the farm. So she didn't even get to inherit her husband's property. She was a college graduate, attended U.S. Grant University, which is now Tennessee Wesleyan University in Athens. She managed the farm successfully, paid the taxes on it, but she could not vote. So when she has a chance to write a letter to her son, and she knows that this might actually happen, I maybe can get to vote one day in my lifetime, I'm going to write him a letter. And she's worried that Senator Candler's speech, who was Harry's mentor, might influence his vote. So she writes a letter, not of admonishment or anything threatening, but of advice from a parent to a grown child. And part of the letter is on display right here, along with the envelope in this case. And here's the full letter on display right there. And you can see it's written in pencil. And also, that's actually a picture on the back of the book there. And I'm glad this is preserved here. It's a great place for it. After Harry T. Burn Sr. passed, my Aunt Ellen Burn wanted everything as far as possible to be centralized here. Well, that didn't happen. I'm still finding stuff that got lost after he passed, but I'm glad the letter's here, and a lot of his personal papers are here too upstairs. So we'll look at page 2 and 6 that I have highlighted. She says, most of this is very casual, chit-chat about what's going on back home, things like that, you know, not very formal. But she works in her message very persuasively rather than just, what's the expression, you're laying it on real thick and, you don't beat them over the head with it, you persuade, especially the oldest child who was quite hard-headed from what I've been told. So, hurrah and vote for suffrage and don't keep them in doubt. I noticed Chandler's speech. It's actually Candler. It was very bitter. Have been watching to see how you stood, but have not seen anything yet. So she's noticed he's not taking a stand. He's just, eventually you got to make a decision, Harry, okay? And then page 6 on your right. Don't forget to be a good boy and help Mrs. Cat with her rats. Is she the one that put rat in ratification? And that's a reference to a political cartoon where Carrie Chapman Catt, who was the heir to Susan B. Anthony, probably the most respected second-generation suffragist, was pushing the letters RAT into the rest of the word ratification, proving that Febb was actually paying close attention to the suffrage movement for many years, and she couldn't have possibly known her son would get the chance to vote on this as a freshman legislator at 24 years old. So now Harry's going to tell us how this letter got to Nashville.
I don't know whether the interesting thing about the letter is that the envelope was addressed by your father. Did you know that?
No.
Well, Mother was a very proud person, very much of a stickler for etiquette. And
I bet this doesn't appear in that.
no, I don't guess it will. And she wrote the letter with a pencil. She was out of ink. And she wouldn't address the envelope without the pencil. So she gave the letter to your daddy to take to, I don't know where he was at the time. He was not at the Hoosier Mill then, was he?
No, he didn't.
But anyway, you see the envelope, you see your father's handwriting on it. So he was the one that really addressed it to me.
How Harry Jr., he got the original, hasn't he?
No, he only has a photocopy.
Who has the original?
I have the original.
Okay, so I actually found out during my research that it was actually my great-grandfather, Jack Burn, and Jamie Burn on the left, his father, of course, the father of my grandfather, Bill, who actually addressed the letter, or the envelope, and the envelope's right over there in that case. So I never knew that. It's pretty neat to find that out. And as you can see, my great-grandfather wrote this in pen, no street, no zip code, just Honorable H.T. Burn, Nashville, Tennessee, state capital, and somehow a little 12-year-old house page found Harry and gave it to him right before the vote took place. And it got by train from Nyota to Nashville in 2 days. Remarkable. So I don't know if they can do that now, but they did it back then. So they were very, very efficient. And nowadays, you know, you hear honorable, it's like the Right Honorable Boris Johnson or the Right Honorable Angela Merkel. Well, this is the state legislators, part-time people getting paid nothing, but they were honorable back then. So, okay. Okay, now, Harry walks onto the floor of the House on the morning of August 18th, 1920, 101 years ago next week. He has the red rose in his lapel and the suffragists in the gallery on either side. That's actually a pretty good setup for once. I can actually kind of compare this to the House chamber, but they see him wearing the red rose and they're like, oh, we're beat. We can't win now. We've lost him and we're going to lose by a couple of votes. So the letter's in his jacket pocket inside of it. There are 2 votes to table the amendment. The Speaker, Seth Walker, who was a turncoat, actually was supposed to be for it, went against it. He decided we're going to table this and not actually put our names on it for or against, so we can go home and get reelected in November. Typical political stuff. You know, just, are they done talking about it? Okay, all right. So that doesn't work. It's a 48-48 tie. And there's a representative from Gibson County in West Tennessee named Banks Turner who's expected to be voting against suffrage. He actually votes for it. He votes against tabling and keeps this resolution alive, the resolution to concur with the Senate, which passed overwhelmingly. And he does that on both roll calls. So think of him as the person who assists Harry for Harry's game-winning layup. But it's 48-48. One more person's got to move over to the suffrage side. So on the third roll call, the vote on the merits of the resolution, the actual up-down vote, you have to have a majority. Not even a tie will do anything. It's not like a playoff hockey game where you got to keep going. I mean, it's majority or nothing. So that's when Harry changes. And he's only 7th from the alphabet, from the top. He votes yes, and everyone's shocked. You know, and they're still listening. They're still tallying up there in the gallery. And they had to go through the rest of the alphabet, and everybody stayed the same. And he broke the tie with a 49-47 majority, making Tennessee the perfect 36th state to ratify this amendment, enfranchising tens of millions of women across the United States. And you can see we had a limited crowd and a socially distanced crowd in Nashville last year. I was invited, thankfully, by our state legislators in McMinn County to attend this, and then I had to get across town to the Centennial Park for their monument over there to be dedicated. But this is a reenactment. It was really well done, and just imagine 5 times as many suffragists dressed in white and yellow and purple, just celebrating so loud you can't even hear yourself think. And Carrie Chapman Catt actually heard them screaming from the House chamber at the Hermitage Hotel, which is about a quarter mile down the hill from there. That's how loud they were. So, and then after that, allegedly this happened. Well, there's a little bit of truth to that, but most of it is totally false. So this is one thing that frustrates me. Of course, as you know, as a historian, those of you in here, you run into contradictions and you put together as best as you can. And I know what didn't happen here. That's the important thing. But Harry T. Burn Sr. discusses what happened after the vote. And Harry T. Burn Jr. wrote a form letter about it based on what his father told him. And then you have the newspapers from that time, 1920, and they're all just, makes me want to pull my hair out. And so many contradictions in there. But basically what it came down to was the governor was worried Harry might be in trouble. He wasn't in trouble. I mean, you know, voting for this amendment, that's nothing. I mean, if you're protesting in front of Woodrow Wilson's White House and they throw you in prison and try to force feed you, that's something. But he votes for this. People complain, you know, but no one's trying to hurt him. But the governor wanted to be careful. So they assigned him a bodyguard. He didn't like that. So if there's a row of officers on either side of the House chamber in Nashville, he goes out, this one right here, he goes out a window, and that's true, because he wants to get away from the bodyguard. Well, his son says nothing else happened after that, whereas he says, I got chased, you know, Harry Singer says, I got chased down the road because they found me again. The sergeant at arms found me again, chased me to the Hermitage Hotel. And then the newspapers say, well, this might have happened another time 10 days later. So I put that in the book too, that it might have happened twice, but I do know one thing. In 1950, when they're celebrating 30 years of this, Harry Jr. is a teenager. He goes to Nashville with his parents, and he said, a very elegantly groomed matron approached my father and said, Mr. Burn, I was a schoolgirl in 1920, and my mom let me skip school and watch you cast a deciding vote, and I saw them chase you down the street. And he said, Madam, those are interesting times. So, too polite to correct her, but someone saw somebody get chased that day. All right, so, but the point is, he was not chased by an angry mob at any time, either on August 18th or August 30th. There was never in any danger, but he did go out that window. And I have pictures in the book of where he went out. On the left here, you'll see, the very far left, you'll see Banks Turner, who gave Harry the assist to the game-winning layup. Harry shaking hands in the above right. You can see Harry's sheaf of telegrams and letters in his outside left jacket pocket. Harry's shaking hands with Anita Pulitzer of the National Women's Party. So she's, thankfully, he came through for them at the last minute. You know, nothing like, you know, waiting to the last minute. And of course, his photograph's very staged. And also, the lady in the bottom right is actually another suffragist from the National Women's Party, Sue Shelton White, who was actually imprisoned for her activism in Tennessee. She's from Jackson. Now, this is one of my favorite pictures, because if you see Harry, he's right there in the middle. I don't know if you can see your cursor here, but you can't. But there's one lady in the picture, Harriet Taylor Upton. She was actually a member of the Republican Executive Committee nationally. And so right above, to your perspective, from the top left is where he is. He's looking to the left and he's smiling real big. And this is all the Republicans that voted for suffrage in Tennessee taking a very staged picture. And he just looks so happy right there. And this is one of the few pictures related to suffrage that Harry T. Burn Jr. kept in his office. This is one he really liked. So Harry defends his vote, you know, all sorts of accusations, you know, bribery, things like that. And he's going to explain that right here, discussing another suffragette. You had Banks Turner, Harry T. Burn, and a third suffragette who helped get this amendment through the House.
Yes, Major Stallman of the Nashville Banner and Harry Adler of the Chattanooga Times were very bitter about the adoption of the resolution, and the Major himself, or some of his lieutenants in the Nashville Banner, about 2 men from West Tennessee, to give affidavits. I only saw them once, maybe twice. In those days, I never did see the originals. Don't know whatever became of them. Which those men testified that they heard certain conversations that indicated that I was to receive some consideration for my vote. I always thought if they had any basis at all for what they were saying, it was because I remember that Joe Hanover of Memphis, after the vote was cast, came up the aisle and put his arms around my shoulder and said, "Harry, that's the most valuable vote you've ever cast in a man's lifetime. It'll be worth more to you than anything you've ever done," or something of that sort. If there was ever any excuse for the affidavits at all, I figured it was something of that sort.
Now, who was the man that said that?
Hanover of Memphis. He's my friend. He was for suffrage. If he
Representative.
yes, I don't. He didn't have any improper motive in saying it. If those were the words that he said, but it was something on that basis, and they were saying that I had been improperly influenced. But,
Joe Hanover, immigrant from Poland, he was actually beaten up, and they used slurs against Jews in the elevator at the Hermitage Hotel. So he did a lot of work to get this amendment passed, along with Banks Turner and Harry T. Burn. Okay, now my favorite telegram: voting for suffrage, enrolled your name among the immortals. Stand firm, from John W. Bayless of Athens, Tennessee. I really like that one. And this is actually a telegram where Carrie Chapman Catt wrote in pencil, just like Febb, I guess great minds think alike, I don't know, but where she said, paraphrasing, you can always be proud of your son for what he did. So I'm glad that this telegram was saved of Carrie Chapman Catt, communicating with my great-great-grandmother. And, I don't know why people didn't smile for pictures back then, and Febb doesn't look very thrilled, but this is actually Abby Crawford Milton pinning the pin onto Febb's dress. She lived to be 110 years old. She was a great Chattanooga suffragist, and she gives Febb this award for her service to the suffrage cause at the courthouse in Athens. They couldn't get Febb to come anywhere but Athens. She wouldn't come up here. So, and Harry's about 5'11" with shoes on, so you can see Febb is probably 5'7" or 5'8", so back then pretty tall for a lady. Now, there was a banquet at the Hotel Farragut, just somewhere over here, not far from us, a month later. And I like what Harry said here. He gave the credit to the women themselves, and they should be getting this medal, not me and not the rest of us Immortal 49, because they invited all the 49 legislators that voted yes here to Knoxville to celebrate. And he said, "I'm glad fate gave me a small part in making Tennessee the perfect 36 states." So it was good to see Harry give credit where credit was due there. And also preserved here, the McClung collection, Harry's mother's voter card. She got the first voter card in McMinn County. Registration number is 1, color white, and you can see all of the male pronouns, all the hises in there, because they didn't make any new ones for the women voting, So, and it's Mrs. J.L. Byrne, but she got the first one. So I was glad that got preserved there. Okay. Now Harry's going to talk about Nauda's reaction. And remember, he said I had to have a bodyguard to protect me. Well, let's hear what he says now. So,
if there's ever any personal antipathy or bitterness in Nauda, I never knew it. Most of it. Now, Bill Snyder was here. He's the blacksmith, my mother's double first cousin. And he was my guard when I was campaigning for my second term. After this, carried his horseshoe hammer in his hip pocket and stood by behind me to my right when I was making speeches. He always said that anybody tried to bother me, he's going to reach over my shoulder and hit him in the forehead with his hammer. But that was, I never did have anybody to try to attack me physically after I came back. But especially I was never concerned about Nauda.
So never concerned about Nauda, but he also says, I had a bodyguard so no one would attack me, so I don't know. But it's been 40 years later, so I guess he's entitled to forget some details. Okay, one of the few things that was found in Harry T. Burn Jr.'s desk when he passed away by one of our cousins who's in his house now. He kept in his desk the letter his father received from the McMinn County Election Commission in November 1920, informing him he had been reelected and that his vote for suffrage was approved by his constituents. He won re-election by 285 votes, by about, I think, 7 percentage points, and that's thanks to the women. Because, like I said, McMinn was against suffrage by a little bit, maybe 5%, but when you have 900 women registered to vote in McMinn County in 1920, and I'm sure all of them didn't actually get to go vote, but a few hundred of them did, and they flipped it and rescued his career. And he actually said that the women of McMinn County, Democrats and Republicans, both came to my rescue. So, and he got one more term in the State House. And you can see right here, B.J. Hornsby, a vote for it will defeat you in spite of hell. He has to sign Harry's re-election papers. So, yeah. Okay, and then Harry did some stuff and died in 1977. Well, no one's ever going to top voting for suffrage and casting a deciding vote to ratify a federal amendment that changes the country and the world. You know, it's been described as the single largest democratizing event in all of world history. If you think about the amount of women that were able to vote by this one act. But he went on to do many more things, and that's the last 9 chapters in my book. And I'm just going to show you guys some pictures before I wrap this up. Harry studied for the bar and passed in 1923, practiced in Rockwood and Sweetwater. And he only served 2 terms, and he went away. So I'm glad he didn't stay in there forever like some people do. Ran for governor in 1930, didn't come close to winning, but that chapter is really good if you want to get into his political philosophy. He's in the state senate for 2 terms. He's president of the First National Bank in Rockwood for 15 years. He's on the state planning commission. He's also delegate to 4 conventions to change Tennessee's long overdue, archaic, old-fashioned constitution, which from 1870 to 1953 was the longest unaltered constitution in the country. And Harry's like, we need to change some things here. So in many ways. So. Okay, now here's a campaign poster when he ran for governor, very original. Let's have a hot campaign, Harry Burn, you know. But he did not shy away from trying to court the women vote, you know. Women voters are especially invited, so he's shameless about that, and it didn't work. So. And then in 1953, at that first convention, 83 years before he's born even, he sits in the same desk in the House chamber he sat at when he cast a deciding vote when he was a delegate from Roane County. In 1962, he visited the Susan B. Anthony home in Rochester, New York, and the photographer is a genius. He's like, let's get a picture of you, Mr. Burn, with your mother's letter and Miss Anthony in the back. That was a really good picture. And a lot of these pictures weren't in the book for various reasons, mostly because you had to pay for it, and I said, no way. So but I'll show it to you guys here. So, Governor Dunn still with us, age 94. He actually emailed me and said he really liked the book. We've been kind of in contact. I asked if he remembered Harry. He said, I can't recall a thought, but good luck to you. Very nice man. Well, this is one of Harry's last public appearances meeting with Governor Dunn, who at the time was like 40 years old. He's such a young governor. So, I would have said no to all of these questions 5 years ago. Did you know Burn voted to ratify not 1, but 3 federal amendments? If you want to find out what the other 2 are, it's all there in the book. Burn was also an early advocate of lowering the voting age in Tennessee long before it happened nationally, like decades before. He helped to write many of Tennessee's election reform laws in the aftermath of rampant election fraud in the pre-World War II era. I think a few folks in here know about what we're talking about there with the Battle of Athens. And thankfully, voter suppression and voter fraud are rare in this time, but in Harry's time, they were rampant. And he did a lot of things to help fight voter suppression and voter fraud. And he also played a role in reapportioning the state legislature after decades of warning not to postpone the issue. And I'll try to go over that real quick, but in 1965, Harry was at a convention to change the state constitution, and it was gerrymandered so badly, and it wasn't based on political parties, actually based on urban versus rural. So you're supposed to reapportion the Tennessee legislature every 10 years. They didn't do that. They would change the lines for various reasons, but they wouldn't actually do it on population. So for 60 years, they didn't do anything. It was very, very unfairly drawn. And Harry introduced 2 bills in the House 1921, in the Senate 1951, and they rejected both of them. Well, then the Supreme Court intervenes. Earl Warren's Supreme Court with Baker versus Carr, probably a top 10 decision of the 20th century. And they have to do something about it in Tennessee. The feds have ordered it, thankfully. So UT did a study in the early 1960s. So think about the state representatives in Knox County right now. They were underrepresented by over 100%, same for Chattanooga. So let's say maybe, West Knoxville had one state representative with 100,000 people. And let's say somebody from Claiborne County maybe represents 20,000 people. That's not right. It's supposed to be an equal amount of people in every district. The rural block was overrepresented while the urban block was underrepresented. In Cannon County, Middle Tennessee, it's even worse, right next to Murfreesboro. And then in Nashville and Memphis, look at this now. That's a major, major underrepresentation. That vote was being suppressed. All those representatives in Nashville and Memphis didn't have as much weight in their vote as people from Moore County, Jack Daniels, and Lake County, Reelfoot Lake. We'll pick on them, all right? Overrepresented. So it violated the one person, one vote. East Tennessee really grew, and Harry knew that, and Harry wanted to make sure this was redrawn in a fair way. And yeah, like I said, the rural block really dominated that. And now one thing he did that caused controversy, he wanted to keep the state Senate like the U.S. Senate. He wanted to keep that based on territory, not on population. And he actually said, well, if we're going to do the Senate based on population too, which we've done it, why not just have one chamber, a unicameral chamber like Nebraska, but we don't. So our Senate districts are also equal. They used to be unequal, but you can't really, it's hard to replicate that, federal system where the Senate represents the states and the House represents the people federally. You can't really replicate that in the state, but he tried. But anyways, that's a really interesting chapter about that, and it showed you the foresight he had to really make sure that the lines were drawn fairly, because gerrymandering can happen more so than just in Congress. It can happen locally too. So I'll show you some pictures and show you one video, and I'll be finished. There are some local landmarks. If you're interested, you can take a picture of this, or you can freeze frame it if you're watching online or whatever. But I encourage you to visit a lot of the local landmarks related to Harry T. Burn and women's suffrage around here, including the Burn family home in Nyota. And let's see, I'll get on to the Burn Memorial. Of course, you guys know where that is. It's right over here, erected by the Suffrage Coalition back in 2018. Very nice statue. So that's from 3 years ago. This is how the house looks now. Harry had to go big or go home. He's one of those types. He added these tall columns and great at landscaping. The current owner, not so much great at landscaping, but he's open to visitors. He actually has a sign outside, visitors welcome, so I encourage you to go there. There's a depot, recently renovated, City Hall now. There's a mural in Nyota, unveiled early last year, pre-pandemic. There's Harry's marker in the Nyota Cemetery from the Tennessee Historical Commission. My first introduction to him was this sign. My mom showed me that sign when I was 12 years old, roughly 12 years old. When Harry was bank president, he loved the color green. Yeah, big surprise. And he insisted all the bank stationery be light green, paper, dark green ink, and then you paint the building green. And the Rockwood Bank drive-through regions now is still green. And even uglier is the Simmons Bank in Kingston, still green. So his legacy lives on with his horrendous taste in bricks, so painting and buildings. So his law office was above Hunter's Cafe in Sweetwater, which is at the corner of Main Street, US 11, and Morris Street. And there's also a mural in Athens that was unveiled just last year. And you can see Harry and Febb on the top left, along with all the other suffragists. And I have a audio clip to play and a video, and then I'll be happy to take any questions you guys have. So here's Harry reflecting on the vote 48 years later.
Well, if you had to do it over, would you do it again?
Yeah, no argument about that. I said in a speech in July 1921 in Sycamore Park in Los Angeles, addressing the Tennessee Society. At the time, I made the statement that I didn't think that votes for women would be the cure-all and improve the morals of politics as much as those who advocate the study would, and I didn't think it would be whatever proved to be the disaster that its opponents said. It certainly gave women their rights. Now you take your grandmother and my mother here. She was a student of international affairs. She'd been a college woman, and she could vote intelligently. And yet she had illiterate or uneducated men working on this farm that could vote and go down to the polls here and put a big bond issue right on her property.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So I think it was morally right. I thought it then. I still think it.
I really like that clip. There's no regret in what he did, you know. And there's another one. This is a couple of minutes. This is when he's interviewed by, we think, best evidence shows, interviewed by WBIR in 1970 for the 50th anniversary of the vote. And you actually get to see him in color.
Harry, this article says that you are the father of women's suffrage. What is that all about?
Well, that's the first time I've ever been so designated. It's the first time I've ever heard the words expressed in that particular manner. I had always been given credit, of course, properly so, for having cast a deciding vote that gave women the right to vote.
Are you a member of the legislature in 1918?
I was elected in 1918. I served in the regular session of 19 and 19, and this was a special session in August 19 and 20, near the end of my first term.
Now, what did you do to give the women in this country the right to vote?
Well, it took 36 states in to amend the federal constitution. There were 48 states, and 35 had already ratified. And they began a drive to try to get a 36th state, and they prevailed on Governor Albert Roberts of Tennessee to call a special session of the legislature. It was called in early August 19 and 20. And the state Senate passed the resolution, well, say 3 or 4 to 1, overwhelmingly. It came on over to the House. They first thought that the House would pass it maybe by a 5 or 10 vote majority. But there was hundreds and almost thousands of lobbyists around Nashville from all over the United States because it was a national question. And I had left Nowota, my farm, and where my mother lived, going to Nashville planning to vote for women's suffrage. But after I got over there, my political advisors, the elderly statesman in McMinn County, suggested that we ought to let it go over till January, the regular session.
Then it was actually your deciding vote and your work that passed the amendment?
Yes, they made a motion to table, the opposition did, and I was willing to let this go till the January session, so I voted to table. And the vote was 48 to 48, a tie.
Tell me, Harry, are you happy now that
Yes, I've been asked that question 10,000 times, and I've always been glad to answer yes. I've always been glad I did.
Well, forgive Harry, it's McMinn, not McMinn County, okay? But still, I wanted to show you guys, hang on, sorry. Let me get this off here. I'm not very good at Windows. Okay, now I'll bring up my presentation. I want to thank ETHS again for having me here today, and I want to thank them for their help when I was researching this book here 4 years ago. Time flies, and hope I didn't go too long. Hope you guys enjoyed this, and really look forward to this. It was an honor to be here, and I'll be happy to take any questions you have. Thank you.
And it was answered a little bit in the last thing here, but I wrote this down. In your research, did he have any real idea of how monumental his decision was at that time, since it was a change, as I understand it? Am I saying that right?
I think he had to have known what a big deal it was, but what was kind of funny is he was still okay with tabling it and going home and getting reelected if he thought that he could get away with it. But once he realized that without, like if it was going to lose by 2, 3, 5 votes, but once he realized it was going to die without him, he switched over. There's a little bit of opportunism, but just like any politician, he thought he could try to weasel his way out of it because it's controversial. But when it really mattered, he did vote yes. And then the way he handled the lies in the news media at the time and all the celebrations and everything and all the celebrity, I think he handled that pretty well, which tells me he knew it was coming. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, sure. Any other questions about Harry or maybe his mother, Miss Febb, or any other political stuff? Yes.
I was just a little confused. I thought I heard you say his mother died in 1916, but she couldn't have written the letter when he voted in 1920. So when did he read the letter, and when did she die?
Oh, his father had passed in 1916. Yeah, and then they moved into that new big house, and the letter was written on the weekend of Friday, August 13th, and then it was mailed Monday, August 16th, and arrived on Wednesday, August 18th, the morning of the vote. So
Okay, so he read it the morning of.
yes, he had already read it. Yeah, I mean, just in time. It was incredible timing. So, yeah. And Febb passed away in 1945 at age 71. So she lived quite a bit longer. So.
Is both murals done by the same artist? Showed in that. They look similar to me, I just wonder.
The Athens mural was done by a man named Sam Welty. The Nada one, I've forgotten his name, but it's two different people. So, yeah.
Very similar way they styled it.
Yes.
And as you stated a couple of weeks ago at another event I was at, it's interesting to note that both of those, considering voting issues, happened in McMinn County. That's how unusual that was.
Yes. McMinn County, your vote will be counted as cast, and you can vote no matter what your gender is. So McMinn County is proud of its nationally known adherence to the right to vote with the Battle of Athens and Harry T. Burn. Yes. Yes, sir.
For federal elections, weren't there already state and local elections where women could vote?
Yes, I'm glad you asked that. This is one of those things where, people can look back and judge things for being flawed, but the federal Constitution still gives states the right to determine voter qualifications and conduct elections. That can be abused. It has been, it still is. But thankfully they were given that right because, as you can see on that map, all sorts of states out west, in the Mountain West, on their own, extended the franchise to women decades before the federal government did. And they could vote for local, state, federal, primaries, general elections, anything like that. And if that power had been given to the federal government at the very beginning, just imagine the restrictions you would have had on voting all the way through the 20th century to the 1960s. But yes, that's true. Out west, there were a lot of women already voting, but this amendment enfranchised so many more women because mostly in the southern United States and the mid-Atlantic, they had limited to no suffrage at all. Yes. Yes.
In your introduction, you said that, were we understanding you're writing some other things?
Yes, I should have mentioned, but I'm glad I didn't because I probably went too long. But the first journalist to actually interview Febb Burn after the vote, she didn't really like the attention, but everyone wanted to interview her after that. She's a mother that saved suffrage, and there was a journalist from Chattanooga named Nellie Kenyon, Kenyon, who had just started her career as a journalist, filming for her mother, who did the society work, like they had to do back then. But she did the hardcore journalism stuff, which back then, of course, was all the the man's work. And she went and got the first interview with Febb, and it was really good, and it helped me learn a lot about her because she got so many great answers out of her. Because I was, too immature to ask my grandfather Burn what his grandmother Burn was like when I was a kid. So she helped me out a lot. And the other book is about a political machine in Polk County. And I learned about that because the Battle of Athens inspired the overthrow of the machine in Polk County in 1948, 2 years later. And Harry got caught up in that because he was representing Polk County's district in the state Senate many years later. So yeah, just it's amazing how all this connects. So well, those are the next two. So thanks for asking. Yeah. Any more? All right, well, I thank you all again very much, and you can get a book over here. I'll be glad to sign it. Thank you so much.